The Ultraman franchise has a variety of shows and movies, many with different tones, approaches, and directions. Some are good, and some are bad. Ultraman the Ultimate Hero is an Ultraman show that falls somewhere in between. It's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world either. It's a mediocre show at best, but it tends to get a grunt from fans when it's brought up. I managed to get my hands on this series during the glory days of Mega Upload, before it was shut down. As a matter of fact, that was how I got most of the Ultraman series. But now that there is an official Blu-ray release from Subaraya themselves, there's no longer any need for fans of this particular show, such as myself, to rely on bootlegs and poor quality rips. But is this American-produced Ultraman even worth buying on Blu-ray? Is it worth even watching at all? Ultraman the Ultimate Hero is the most infamous installment in the franchise for having the most badass redesigns of classic monsters from the original 1966 Ultraman show. But it's also way more infamous for having the most lackluster monster battles in the history of the franchise. A majority of the battle scenes are slow and uneventful. This is very apparent in the first episode when Ultraman fights one of the Baltons. The fight is very awkward, silent, and nearly downright embarrassing, but fortunately, not all of the battle scenes are like this. Some have their moments, but they still fall short in comparison to the better choreographed battles of past Ultraman shows. I don't know the exact reason why the filmmakers made the fights so slow and uneventful, but I believe that the suits might have been too fragile to take some damage, and that seems to be the case when you examine the monster battles more closely. It almost seems like the suit actors are trying to be careful not to damage the other suit. This is the one single flaw that makes some fans downright forsake the show, but it's a flaw I'm personally willing to let slide because there's some other things that I personally enjoyed about The Ultimate Hero. Being an American co-production, the show sports some pretty impressive production values, from the design of the winter base and uniforms to the designs of the monsters. The monsters are taken directly from the original 1966 Ultraman show, but The Ultimate Hero is not a remake nor a reboot of Ultraman 66. My guess is that the brains behind this project were too lazy to come up with new original monsters and decided to rehash some monsters from Ultraman 66. And to be honest, it's kind of a good thing they did because the filmmakers managed to pull off some pretty badass designs for most of the monsters. Although I found the redesigns for Dada, Zeton, and the Baltons to be immensely disappointing. Another thing I found disappointing was the soundtrack. While I do admit the soundtrack does have its moments here and there, it ultimately comes off as generic and formulaic. Long story short, the soundtrack is forgettable. Which is disappointing because the soundtrack for the Australian Ultraman series, Ultraman Towards the Future, has the opposite effect. It's a pretty damn good, memorable soundtrack. It's just a shame they didn't get the same composer for this series. The principal characters deliver decent performances, but it's not enough for us to get invested in them. I found the characters from Ultraman Towards the Future to be way better in comparison because those characters had charm, wit, and momentum. I mean, there's some humor every now and then in The Ultimate Hero, but Towards the Future had humor in every single episode. The Ultimate Hero takes itself a little too seriously at times. The characters in The Ultimate Hero are pretty dull in comparison, but it's still pretty great to see Kane Kosugi in the lead role of an Ultraman show. For those who don't know, Kane Kosugi was the actor who played the Black Ranger in Ninja Sentai Kaku Ranger and Kazama in Godzilla Final Wars. One thing that the Ultimate Hero has going for it is that it's a little bit sophisticated like the original Ultraman and the original Ultra 7. While past Ultraman shows like Ultraman Taro, Ultraman Leo, and Ultraman 80 have taken the franchise in a more campy and wacky direction, Ultraman Towards the Future and Ultraman the Ultimate Hero take the franchise back to basics by focusing on suspense, mystery, and some political and social commentary thrown here and there. Overall, Ultraman the Ultimate Hero is far from one of the best Ultraman shows, but it's far from one of the worst. Like I said, it's mediocre at best. The reason why I enjoy it is for its amazing Hollywood production values, Kane Kosugi, and because it's only 13 episodes long. Now, I'm not saying that the show is great like Ultraman Tiga, Ultraman Nexus, the original Ultraman, or the original Ultra 7. The Ultimate Hero is heavily flawed and could benefit from some revisions and further development, but it's still a show I enjoy watching here and there. The Ultimate Hero was part of Subaru's plan to bring Ultraman to international markets. While Ultraman Towards the Future was an Australian production, the Ultimate Hero was an American production. Unfortunately, no one picked up the series and it simply died out in obscurity from the rest of the world, but it was released in Japan under the title Ultraman Powered in the mid-90s. While I don't recommend this title for any newcomers to Ultraman, this is something that's worth a watch to see how America tried to make their own Ultraman series.